So I made this really cool and long guide about this deck, and then I made a whole YouTube video about this deck. Cool. So anyhow, I'm here to discuss the patch notes after a soul-crushing defeat of content creation as Blizzard strikes again. So anyhow, I'm going to talk about the implications of these changes to the meta and what exactly this really means. So one thing, of course, the Kael'thas Sunstrider nerf is the first nerf we're going to look at. It goes from every third spell you cast each turn costs 0 to every third spell you cast each turn costs 1, which isn't a major effect, especially when you look at how the Guardian Druid, the combo Druid, has been using Kael'thas Sunstrider more of as a way to speed up the combo. So I think this probably slows down that deck by a turn. So I don't think the deck is completely unplayable. I think there's going to need to be some amount of adaptation to happen before this deck is competitive again. But it's definitely not like completely killed the deck for sure, for certain. But it definitely slowed it down. I think this nerf was actually needed as much as it affected my content schedule. I think this is probably what the card initially should have said whenever it was printed. I don't know when Blizzard developers are going to realize that things costing 0 is usually bad for the game. We saw Twin Slice, and we've seen lots of cards where if you change their cost from 0 to 1, they're completely unplayable. Or at least not as broken as they initially were. One thing to look at with this is Druid's bad matchups. So if we take a look at the matchup statistics for Guardian Druid in Legend, we notice that Libram Paladin is the big one here. One of the most played decks in the format, I think, in everywhere except for Grandmasters and top 1000 Legend. This deck is very heavily played because it beats up on Druid. We also have the Notorious, the Turtle Mage, and Zoo Warlock. These all have, and this is Secret Warlock, and Big Warrior is another one. All of these decks have relatively good matchups against Guardian Druid, and so these decks also Priest. I completely whiffed on Priest. So I think that because Guardian Druid is going to come a little bit out of the meta, that these decks inherently are going to be a little worse to play. Now this is a lot of the meta. In fact, if you spend any time watching Grandmasters this weekend, the decks of the format were Guardian Druid, a Priest, and some form of Rogue, and usually some form of Warrior. What I think this means is that some variation of Rogue, specifically Weapon Rogue, is probably going to become the best deck in the format. This deck's worst matchups were faster decks than it. I have the wrong lighting. The decks that do poorly, the decks that do well against Weapon Rogue are going to be decks that are very fast, so Aggro Demon Hunter, Face Hunter. The Druid decks, of course, were pretty good against them. And then Libram Paladin, of course, in addition to Stealth Rogue. My guess is that the meta will kind of turn into a much faster meta than what we've seen, very similar to very early post-release of Skullmancy Academy. So we might see a resurgence of Face Hunter and Aggro Demon Hunter and Weapon Rogue and perhaps even like Face Rogue variations. And then I think we're going to have decks that counter that, which of course will be Libram Paladin. If we also look at when Libram Paladin's matchups, they're usually pretty bad against Rogue decks, which is another reason that I think that Rogue decks are going to take over the format, especially Weapon Rogue here. Weapon Rogue just has a really good matchup generally across the board with a lot of decks and can just win games. So I do think Weapon Rogue will probably become the premier deck of the format. The other change was made to Mindrender Illucia from 2 mana to 3 mana. This makes this card strictly worse against aggro decks because you used to be able to play this out on turn 2, and then your opponent has a dead hand, and then they swap decks with you, or they swap hands with you, and so you basically skip your opponent's next turn for 2 mana, which is very powerful. Putting it to 3 mana makes it much harder to combat against aggro decks, which is another reason that I think that aggro decks are definitely going to become the premier deck of the next format. Now, I could be completely wrong, and it may need a lot of testing to play around with, but that's my best guess, especially on the initial format. One thing also to remember is that aggro decks are very good at the beginning of an unknown format. I don't know if these changes are enough to completely rework the format. We saw a couple Demon Hunter changes last season, or last expansion, that didn't really change the deck a lot and didn't really change the meta at all. So this may also be the case. This might actually not shake things up too much. Of course, this meta was still in process of being refined, and decks were still coming about and being played a bunch. So there wasn't really a definitive meta as we had last season, where Demon Hunter was just obliterating everything. So I'm definitely curious to see exactly where this goes. But my best guess, of course, is that aggro is going to be very good, at least for the beginning of this upcoming format. So that's it for today. Just a short video just to kind of talk about this, because I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was fascinating. Also, it completely butchered my content schedule, so I figured I'd publish something that had a little more relevance to it, rather than just a deck guide on a deck that doesn't exist anymore. So if you like this kind of content, please don't forget to like and subscribe on this video, and comment and talk about what you think is upcoming for the coming format of what's going to happen. Yeah, I think that's about it.